So I want to go ahead and just thank everybody for joining us. I am Jennifer Merlo. I am the Director of Veterinary Affairs here at Fear Free and very excited to be your co-host this evening for our at-home veterinary visits, how Fear Free makes visits even better. I'm joined by Dr. Lyndsey Kingsley from BetterVet. Few housekeeping items to just go through really quickly before we start. As a reminder, your microphone will be muted tonight, so please use the chat feature to make any comments. We do ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. We will have time at the end for some questions, but if we don't get to all the questions, we will try to address them in some follow-up emails. Tonight's presentation is brought to you by Fear Free Pets in conjunction with BetterVet. We're super excited to have Dr. Kingsley join us today and share her knowledge, tips, and tricks. I would love to give a brief introduction before I pass it over to her to get started. Dr. Lyndsey Kingsley started her full-service mobile practice back in 2016 after experiencing burnout from the revolving door style of patient care in a brick-and-mortar practice. She never looked back from that point on. She merged with BetterVet in 2021 and now serves as the medical director. Dr. Kingsley is a 2014 graduate of Texas A&M and resides in Austin, Texas. And now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Kingsley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. I'm so excited to be here. As you mentioned, I've been in house call practice since 2016. So I'm just a little bit passionate about it, just a little bit. So I'm really excited to be here and share this with everybody. And I'm so grateful to be partnering with Fear Free to really make this industry-wide and industry standard. So we'll move right along. So a little bit about me and how I got the house call bug, if you will. So I'm a recovering victim of brick and mortar burnout. I worked for a very busy, somewhat larger practice that was just kind of a revolving door, as you mentioned. You know, every 15 minutes you were seeing somebody different, seeing somebody new. We were not fear-free at the moment, and there was wild differing standards with technicians. I actually just even going back a little bit further, going into vet school, actually never wanted to deal with dogs and cats or small animals. I was purely interested in exotic animal medicine and only wanted to work in a zoo. Got through school a little bit and got to clinical year and realized, oh, it is awesome to be able to handle things without having to dart them, and be able to really experience the client-patient relationship and how powerful that is. And to be able to advocate for a patient on behalf of that. So I shifted a little bit and met in the middle and ended up at a clinic that actually had a board certified avian veterinarian that was kind enough to take me under her wing, no pun intended, and really show me the ropes. I worked with mostly exotics at the time, where you either were fear-free or you weren't successful in a way. So we were informally practicing that way. And then after she parted ways with the clinic, it just, the floodgates opened, and I had that scary moment where I thought, well, maybe I could do it better, which is the famous last words. So I, without much haste, started my own mobile practice. I purchased a Liberate truck. For those who aren't familiar, is essentially a hospital on wheels. It was turnkey, ready to go. So we hit the ground running and never looked back. I had 2 technicians that are still very dear to me today and are both very passionate about fear-free and house calls as well. So once we had been up and running and the pandemic hit, kind of blew the lid off of the entire practice. And we realized that we couldn't keep up with the load and decided to take the hand from the heavens and merge with BetterVet, which has been a wonderful experience so far. We as a company are fear-free across the board. All of our technicians and doctors are fear-free certified within the first 30 days if they're not already. And it has just been so revolutionary for some of these doctors coming from brick and mortar clinics where it was just this crazy zoo of a treatment room. And so that is my background and how it all got started. And now here we are 2.5 years later and have grown tremendously and now have the opportunity to work with Fear Free. So the benefits of at-home veterinary care. I mean, a lot of them are obvious, but it's not just lower stress in general, or just being in a more comfortable scenario. We're talking about eliminating car rides, waiting rooms. So by the time you'd see an animal or a patient in a brick and mortar clinic, they're already at a 10. You know, their adrenaline is rushing, like you're already behind the queue. And with an at-home veterinary care, we walk in and try and just be, you know, the friendly neighbors that are just here to have kind of a funny belly rub. And a lot of times that's really all it takes for a fearful animal to actually not be affected by veterinary care, you know, and it really sets you up as a practitioner for success. This is anecdotal, but I swear up and down, and I would love one day in all my copious spare time to do an actual formal study on it. But many of my feline patients in brick and mortar, by the time we got blood work back in both wellness and sick patients, stress leukograms were really, really common, and stress hyperglycemia was really, really common. And it almost came common practice, and it was very easy to just brush it off. It's like, oh, that's just that. When we run blood work on an at-home basis, it's very, very uncommon. And typically when we do see it, it's in actual sick patients. So purely anecdotal, but after quite a few years of doing this, it seems to be a theme, which I'm pretty excited about. So other obvious ones, so decreased risk of infectious disease. So if we have, you know, puppies that are going through their first round of vaccines that don't quite have the immune system, if we have patients that are immunocompromised, that's an obvious one. And then undivided veterinary attention. So being able to be in a pet's environment, a patient's environment, and really just have that one-on-one interaction is so much different than being in an exam room. That's still one-on-one, but you're distracted. There's things going on in the back. There's people pulling you out of rooms. It's just, you can invest so much more of yourself as a doctor in providing undivided attention. So services provided. I think there is a little bit of a stigma around house call practice, which we're trying to reverse. That house call practice, you know, they're good for vaccines and wellness things, but if you have an actually sick patient or anything that needs diagnostics, that's, you know, has to go into a brick and mortar. And that's sometimes true. I'm not saying we're not staying in our lane, but we're actually able to provide a lot of services that a regular brick and mortar would from the comfort of the home and in a fear-free way. So wellness services, routine lab work, with the caveat that we can't always get same day. So that can be frustrating. Our hematology machines, I have learned the hard way, don't really appreciate being bumped down the road at 60 miles an hour in day out. So we tend to stick to sending everything out for that reason. We're actually able to provide radiographs similar to, we use machines that are primarily equine. So they're very mobile. We can move them in and out if we have large patients that are unable to get up and down. From our mobile hospitals, you know, we can come to them doing fast scans and diagnostic ultrasounds. That is one that varies by location. In some of our regions, we have wonderful partners that are sonographers that are also mobile. And we have partnerships with them and coordinate with scheduling to be able to provide a diagnostic ultrasound in the comfort of the home without having to send them to a specialty hospital and wait for hours at a time, or drop off and pick up at the end of the day. So that piece has really changed my means of practice, is being able to provide those diagnostic ultrasounds. Urgent and supportive care. So the, emergency ear infection that's been going on for 2 weeks. We can really be able to sweep in again without our patients having to go and wait hours in a waiting room. And just for something that we can come to them. We have microscopes in all of our vehicles, so cytology and everything we can do essentially curbside, which is hopefully no longer a bad word in veterinary medicine. Hospice care and in-home euthanasia. I will say, when I started this adventure and I got my mobile hospital and took off and was like, I'm going to save the world on wheels and, save every case and do surgeries and just, that's going to be it. And what I realized is that in-home euthanasia, both the value of the service and how prevalent it is, I really kind of changed my, I wouldn't say it put a damper, but it was really eye-opening, and it made me appreciate it in a whole new light, being able to provide these services and provide comfort, not only for the client, but for the, not only for the patient, but also for the client. Being able to do that. I'm working with a team here in Chicago, and had one of our clients just sidebar. We were there for the emergency ear infection. And she had mentioned in-home euthanasia and asked if we had done that. And she mentioned, I could not imagine that taking my dog, who hates going to the vet, there in the last moments of his life. And it keeps me up at night. So it's really, really powerful to be able to offer those services and provide that kind of dignity for our patients. So we also, in some of our locations where we have mobile hospitals on wheels, can provide dentistry, extractions. We have full dental x-ray, small spays, neuters, mass removals, non-invasive biopsies, that kind of thing, really outpatient procedures, and primarily in non-complicated, otherwise healthy pets. Everybody gets a full workup, even more so than we would in a brick and mortar, because we know with mobile hospitals, we have to do it even better and even safer, because we're waiting and we're recovering those patients where they're up and ambulatory and stable and don't need any additional care. So we're essentially discharging them without having to keep them, in the hospital when they're dysphoric and stressful. We're giving them back really the moment it's safe, versus having that boarding period where the owner's coming to pick up. So moral of the story, we're really trying to change that stigma around house call practice. So all of that being said, I know you're all probably like, well, you can't do everything. And yes, that's true. Part of being a house call practitioner is knowing when to call cases and knowing what's responsible and what's not responsible, and always doing what's best for the patient and their condition. So triaging is so important in our model, and it actually takes a bit of practice, because of the obvious appropriate visits are wellness, hospice, euthanasia. If it's a convenience, or if the owner's unable to travel, behavioral cases, which are drastically increased from the pandemic, and, dogs that didn't get out and get socialized during that critical period of life because everybody was in quarantine. Those are some of the most common cases that we see. Not appropriate. We're not an emergency service. We do not pretend to be an ambulance on wheels, but surgeries requiring hospitalization for pain control, obviously. We do really focus on pain control with ours, but if there's any doubt that that patient might need any kind of overnight care or extended pain control that we couldn't control with with to-go home meds, then we don't touch it. But the caveat to that is oftentimes, it's people will call and say, or schedule an appointment, and my cat's having a hard time breathing. We reach out to that client as soon as we can, and we say, hey, this isn't really within the scope of what's appropriate in our care. We highly recommend to go to an emergency service. And what we learn is that there are so many clients that they know that it's bad, and they know that it's time, and they're not ready to really face it, or they're completely unable to travel. They have no other resource. And in those instances, when everything's exhausted, we can really make a huge difference in these cases, where people are just torn on what to do. And they know, whether it's a behavioral thing, whether they know they're dealing with something really bad, and their pet's old and they don't want to put them through it. And that's a huge piece of our practice as well. So I've gone on and on about house call medicine and what we can do and what we can't do. It's appropriate, it's not appropriate. But now we're going to integrate the fear-free piece. I have to say, when I started my house call practice, I did not have formal fear-free training. And then once I really did, it just completely changed the scope of practice. I mean, our patient exam, I would be horrified to know how many hours and potentially days I spent in the early parts of my house call career trying to fish cats out from box springs or from behind appliances, and just not having that communication piece to the client to prepare them to really have a good environment, and to really understand whether we were walking into a case that was potentially a very fearful pet or anxious pet. And so getting this formal training, it actually made our appointments much faster and far more effective. And instead of, coming back and, the patient hearing the squeak of the brakes of the Lavoie truck and disappearing into another room, things stayed status quo or got better each visit instead of getting worse. So one of the really common questions I get is, what happens if you show up and you have to reschedule the appointment because the pet has a really high FAS score? And with that, and we'll get into it in more detail later, but learning how to communicate to owners what's causing their behavior and what our actions could potentially do long-term, and really trying to look at the long-term goals versus the short-term goals. So yes, we could pin your dog down and give it a rabies vaccine, but I promise you, when we come back in a year, we may or may not be able to. It's just going to compound. So getting that formal training has been just invaluable. And it's really just broke the cycle. I mean, I've been out of school almost 10 years now, and fear-free has gaining traction, from then to now. And the days of the 3-person nail trim and holding the dogs down, I hope to see disappear as we grow as an industry and as we grow with our level of medicine and our level of patient care. So it's really exciting to be able to provide fear-free in a minimally stressful environment. And then finally, with this fear-free, I am so excited, and I get to spread the word and get to spread this knowledge with new house call practitioners, with new doctors that join our practice. And it's just been so much fun. And so I'll stop here, Jen. Did you want to tee this up at all, or do you want me to go right into the benefits of the certification?
Yeah, I can talk about that. One of the really exciting things that's going to be coming in 2024 from Fear Free is a new certified practice offering. So for years, we have been certifying brick and mortar practices, and we've often had requests from house call and mobile practices to develop a fear-free certified practice program that encompasses what house call and mobile veterinarians do. And obviously that is different than a brick and mortar practice. And when we're talking about practice certification, we're talking about not just that all of the staff members are trained in fear-free and know what that means, but it really is talking about how fear-free is implemented into the whole workflow of the practice, as well as taking a step back and looking at the actual place, location, where we're doing the veterinary procedures and care that we're offering. And that's different for mobile and house call practices because it's either in someone's home, maybe it's in their front yard. I have definitely done front yard exams. Or if you do have a mobile unit, it's within that unit. So we were really excited to work alongside BetterVet to kind of come up with this idea of how do we expand our certified practice offering to now encompass mobile and house call practices. So launching in 2024, there will be an official fear-free certified veterinary practice house call offering. So for veterinarians that have a house call practice or corporate groups that are looking to offer this within their practices, their individual practices will be able to go through a practice certification process. It's a little bit different than our traditional brick and mortar because there's different aspects of it. But we do have a set of standards that we ask that these practices adhere to and implement, how they're preparing the clients for that visit, how they're educating pet owners about fear-free, how they're bringing fear-free into the home and addressing the things that might be causing stress or anxiety for those pets when someone is coming to their home and offering veterinary care, and what do we do, and I'm touching on a lot of the things that Dr. Kingsley has already mentioned. So that will be launching. We're hopeful, in the beginning of 2024. So definitely stay tuned. You're going to start seeing some things about it through some marketing messaging, social media messaging. We're working alongside our friends at BetterVet, who we have several of their doctors who are already starting this program so they can be true testaments of how it works and give us feedback and let us know the impact it's having on their practice, which we just think is going to be amazing. So I'll let Dr. Kingsley talk a little bit more, but we will have some information in the follow-up email from this webinar about that offering and things to look for. Certainly, if you work at a house call or mobile practice, or you are thinking of opening one, or somebody that has one, or any of those things, please feel free to reach out to us at Fear Free. We'd love to answer any questions that you have. And I'll hand it back to you, Lyndsey.
Thank you. So I just want to elaborate a little bit more about why I'm so excited about it as a house call practice, as well as being in a network with other house call practitioners. So as Jen mentioned, a custom tailored experience for unique settings. So, being a house call practitioner, you have to be a lot of a doctor and you have to be a little bit of a MacGyver. You're walking into a different environment every single home you walk into. So having just some basic structure that will fit in most of those scenarios, so you will always have something to go back to know that you are practicing in the best means possible, no matter what. So it also sets the bar for all the practitioners, no matter where they're located. So we and I'll get into a little bit more about BetterVet here in just a second, but we have 48 doctors in almost 23 locations. And knowing that everybody has this standard, and not just them, but their entire team is just, it's really, really exciting. And probably the biggest thing that gets me excited is this network of fear-free industry providers who are also, just kind of one tier above, with groomers, trainers, brick and mortar practice. The number of behavior cases that we see as a house call practice, I mean, we're really the last resort in a lot of cases. Being able to know that the trainer you're referring to is not just somebody who, took a class on the internet, but is truly following the same values that you are in practice. And groomers, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I think everybody and their grandma has gotten a doodle from the beginning of the pandemic to now. One of my dear friends owns a boarding facility, and I helped her run dogs one day, and probably 75% of them were some version of a doodle, and it between 2 and 3 years old. So they've taken the world by storm. And if you can imagine letting a doodle that's 2 or 3 years old and very, very high energy, outside running around picking up sticks, like without a groomer, unless the owner is going to take it up as their side, I mean, it would look like that poor dog would look like a Muppet from a horror story. Like, we have to, groomer is just a part of life. But so many of them, being pandemic puppies, if you will, are fearful and have a high level of anxiety and FAS when it comes to being handled. So knowing that with all of the work that we've done with the animals to reduce FAS and to, maintain that status quo and not increase that and make the experience worse moving forward, to be able to pass that off confidently to another professional like a groomer and a trainer, and know that that team member or other professional is not going to take 10 steps back on the one big step we made forward. So that is probably my biggest thing and what I'm most excited about. And then, of course, access to educational resources for clients and practitioners. I have one of my associates in Austin, dealing with more behavior cases. She told me the other day, I refer back to the Fear Free website and Fear Free resources almost daily, just trying to see if there's anything else that I could do better to manage some of these cases. So it's really, really invaluable. And then moving on, I know BetterVet, you've heard a lot about it, but our mission is to provide a better experience for pets, pet parents, and veterinarians. So the first two pieces of that statement, Fear Free is a no-brainer. That is always going to provide a better experience for our patients and our clients. And then for our veterinarians, being a mobile vet, there is something to be said about a work-life balance. I know some people really enjoy the pace of a brick and mortar, but frankly, getting sunshine, during the day and being able to type up notes in a vehicle versus, being stuck after hours in an office. That's another big piece of who we are and what we do, and making sure, if we have happy vets, then we have happy pets. So it's not a really complicated formula. But as I mentioned, we're in all of the locations located below, and we have about 48 doctors nationwide. We were established in 2020, in conjunction with the need for house call veterinarians during the pandemic. But we're growing and we're learning, and it's been a really, really amazing journey to join this company and be able to do things like this and advocate for what we're doing. So we also leverage virtual visits. So we have 2 doctors that are completely virtual, and coincidentally both reside in Hawaii, which is their work-life balance is just off the charts, but they're able to cover some of our weird off hours. So if we have a doctor that's out of office, or if we have a doctor who is, their cutoff time is 5 o'clock, we have doctors in Hawaii who will be covering till 8 or 9. So if we have, a dental that there's something not quite right, the owner's a little bit concerned, we utilize our virtual doctors to be able to assess the situation and just talk them through it, which can really, make or break a client's experience. So we're excited to be in such a unique space and moving forward. So with that, I think it rounds us out to opening the floor up for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Kingsley. So we definitely have several questions. I think one of the big questions that has come through is how you go about handling some of these pets that when you arrive at the house are still acting fearful. Maybe they do have some meds on board, but what types of fear-free techniques do you specifically use for handling some of these pets when you get to the home?
Yeah, and this is a piece that I learned as I started my own business and came across these cases and then refined with formal training with Fear Free. But if for one, educating the client beforehand, we have our pre-appointment questionnaire that tries to evaluate any kind of triggers that patient may have, really get an idea of what might be successful, what's not going to be successful, preparing the client to know, okay, these are the spaces that would be ideal. Please close off areas with hiding places and have low light and all of that good stuff. But if all of that together and all of that preparedness is still leaves us at a point where we have a high FAS, we will first and foremost explain to the owner, what's going on, what that behavior means, what our options are. So what we typically do is prescribe medications if they don't have any. And part of our pre-appointment questionnaire is has your pet been prescribed medications? And if so, list them out, but please give them before our first visit. There's so many times we walk into a visit where the client knows, okay, we had a really difficult experience in a brick and mortar, but everything's going to be different because we're at the home. So we don't need to give any medications, even though it's been prescribed multiple times. So I try and communicate, if it's been prescribed, please go ahead and give it. And if it's their first visit, it's the 13-year-old cat that has never seen, they got their kitten boosters and spayed when they were 6 months old. They haven't seen a vet since then. So we will oftentimes prescribe an appropriate PVP and then reschedule the appointment. And so many of our new doctors come in and they go, oh my God, Kingsley, isn't that client going to rip your head off saying that you need to schedule another appointment to see them, and you just do a visual exam and you don't even put hands on this patient if you're not able to? And really it comes down to communication, just like so many other things. Communication is key. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, just walking a client through what the long-term repercussions of us not taking an extra step and providing that medication and doing whatever we can to reduce FAS, what the long-term implications are. We have clients that are actually excited. And they said, nobody's really communicated that before, and that makes a lot of sense. And they're on board. And if we come back again with meds on board and we still can't get what we need done within a reasonable kind of window of patients, we will oftentimes recommend sedation. We do have a handful of cases where it's just no matter what we do or what we give, it's just not safe for the team. Those are few and far between, but again, we at that point are this patient's last resort. And if we don't look to chemical sedation, then that pet is being denied care. So at that point, we will often walk the owner through free muzzle training, and however long that takes. If the pet is well, we'll work through muzzle training, and then we'll progress to sedation in the field. So some of where we have a little bit of a mixed bag. So all of our teams that are in mobile hospitals, they're in mobile hospitals. It's like sedating in a hospital. In our SUV and car models, we actually worked with an anesthesiologist to devise both. The fear-free medication schemes and recommendations are wonderful, but we even took it one step further to work with an anesthesiologist to say, okay, let's tweak this and refine this, specifically being in the field. And that's been really, really useful, as well as providing crash kits, monitors, oxygen, you name it. And of course, there's always some level of risk, and there's some state boards that even say, we don't advocate for small animal sedation in the field. But again, if this is the patient's last resort, then that's sometimes the only option that they have, versus saying, okay, well, you guys need to go to a brick and mortar, and that situation is inevitably just going to be worse. So we certainly will communicate to the owner the pros and cons and the potential effects, but that is how we handle patients with truly high FAS in a unique environment.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think those are really good tips and kind of how you guys handle that. I think one question that came up based on that discussion was just, how do you communicate charging for a house call if you're just able to do a visual exam, have to prescribe meds, and then do a follow-up? I think that question, comes in not just with mobile practices, but also with brick and mortar. We get that question too about how do you communicate charging for that? What is the policy for that? Are we charging for both exams? Talk a little bit about that, Dr. Kingsley.
Yeah, so we do have, obviously we've taken time to come to the home. We've brought the hospital to you. We've spent time, and oftentimes reviewing this with the client and describing what's going on, and communicating the long-term repercussions of, okay, we're going to pin him down and do it now, or we're going to do this the right way. It takes as much time as doing an exam and giving vaccines. We're there just as long. And again, with proper communication, obviously, charges are sometimes a sticking point, but most owners, once they understand that if we do this the right way and can get to a point where we're not just making it worse, it actually can make things more affordable long-term, because that pet might need sedation every single visit for any little thing the rest of its life if we do it the wrong way now. So from charging, we assign the value of why we're recommending this for a long-term goal. And then at that point, if it's still a sticking point, we sometimes have owners that will just say, okay, well, I can only afford one visit. And so we'll just have to reschedule at another time. But more often than not, one little nuance with house call practice that was actually pretty amazing for me that I didn't see coming is that the clientele that seek house calls is quite a bit different than what we get in a brick and mortar. It's kind of a mixed bag. You have the client that comes in a brick and mortar and they have a sick dog and they have $50. If we're upfront with our costs from the get-go, the type of client is reaching out to us because they feel that's what's best for their pet. And it is usually clients that are a little bit more affluent. It's millennials that their pets are their children. So that is probably a little freakonomics piece in the background of why it's not as big of a deal as it intuitively comes out as.
Awesome.
So we do, and I think I didn't even answer the question. So we do charge our travel fee and physical or in visual exam, which is slightly less than the physical exam. And then once we come back, it's the house call and then physical exam.
Perfect. And that's, I think a lot of our land-based practices, brick and mortar practices do a similar, they may charge for a like doctor consultation versus an exam type of a fee, and it may be a lesser fee for one of those two things. But I agree with Dr. Kingsley, you know, if we're taking time to spend evaluating the pet, even if it is a visual exam, we're spending time educating the owner, talking to the owner, talking about what's best for the pet. Certainly if you're, you know, doing what you can to prescribe a PVP, then all of that should be charged for, and there's a good way to communicate that to owners. We've gotten multiple questions about cats and house call practice, and kind of you can touch on a little bit of how often are you recommending pre-visit medications for cats with house call practices? How are you advising owners to prepare cats before a house call practice? Is there a preferred area where you like for owners to keep the cat so that you don't end up showing up and the cat is hiding under the bed somewhere? How do you deal with the cats that when you arrive, maybe they, again, have medications on board and they're still not able to be handled, things like that. So would love your insight on that.
Yeah, no, cats, oof, they keep life interesting. That is absolutely certain. But again, it really comes back to client education beforehand. And not everybody reads, you know, the whole spiel of, hey, this is how we're going to set ourselves up for success with this visit. But the number of times pre that communication, you know, owners would answer the door with the scrambling cat in their arms, and, you know, you can't even get a history because everybody's just trying to keep them from running under the bed. And it's just this scramble. But if we have that piece of communication to say, hey, if we need you to close off any areas where that they could get under, preferably places like bathrooms where you can, you know, reduce the lighting. If you want to play, you know, soft music, or I had a client actually turn me on to a cat radio on Apple Music. I haven't dug into it, but it's like sounds of purring and needing. So anyways, some sort of, you know, audible thing to both help just kind of soothe the cat, and it also helps not hearing the screeching brakes of the giant truck that they might or might not notice. Having feel away and pheromones and putting familiar beds and, you know, small hiding places like small beds, or if they like to go under towels, just to, you know, not just stuff them in a bathroom, you know, with blaring fluorescent lights. So as soon as you walk in, they're trying to shoot out between your legs, or, you know, doing gymnastics off of the walls and knocking things down. So that helps quite a bit. And then us coming in again with pheromone coated towels, we try and spray everything down, as well as spray our scrubs and everything before we even enter. But having that proper containment allows us to come in, have a good assessment of what's going on, what are our goals of this visit, as well as are taking into consideration the history, and then establishing that wants versus needs before we even put hands on a patient. So, you know, that really gets buy-in from the owner. We describe, you know, what we're going to do, kind of if things don't go the way they are, then this is kind of what we're going to do. So we just give a brief overview to help prepare that owner for what's about to happen. And then once we go into the area of the cat, you know, just as any other fear-free or environment, you know, it's essentially letting them come out of the carrier without the carrier, if you will. So, you know, if we have a cat that as soon as we walk in the bathroom is just clearly, you know, we're not going to get anywhere. We don't even push it. You know, that's probably my My biggest word of wisdom to our new doctors is, if you're in a situation where that animal is at a 10 and they're terrified, and just walk away, have the conversation, reschedule the visit, for prescribed PVPs. We do a ton of compounding. We have some clients that we will say, okay, we're going to prescribe medications. Here's the cheap way. You can dump this capsule in, about 30% success rate, whether that cat's going to take it or not, or we can get it compounded into something tasty, like a flavored liquid or a crumbled treat that you can mix in with food. And most of the time, I would say our feline patients, we have more success with PVPs than we do our canine patients in the chill protocols that we use. So, and then again, if we come back and even with those meds on board, we're unable to handle that pet reasonably, then we have that conversation of, okay, we need to sedate and in order to reasonably handle them, both for their safety as well as ours.
One of the other questions that came in, Dr. Kingsley, was about dispensing meds. Being house call practitioners, are there certain regular meds that you guys keep in stock with you that are your go-to meds? Are you prescribing them through online pharmacies or human pharmacies? How are you guys handling PVPs and different medications that you're prescribing?
Yeah, so we keep a pretty lean pharmacy, but we do have a pharmacy with us. We try and focus on point of care medications. So as I mentioned before, all of our blood work goes out. So anything that requires a diagnosis or a panel to prescribe medication, so a thyroid medication, for instance, or any kind of insulin doses or anything like that, we need the diagnosis first. And in those instances, we typically prescribe on our online platform. We use VetSource. And then the refills, because we're all working remotely, we don't have, the front office that we can just leave meds for the owner to pick up. So everything that needs a refill or that needs a lab report to dispense, that all goes to our online pharmacy. We carry primarily, antibiotics, ear meds, eye meds, pain meds, things that we can walk in, assess a patient and say, you need this now and today, regardless of what we find in our blood work. So that's what we really focus on, as well as preventatives. And we use a lot of compounding as well. Shout out to Mix Lab. They're amazing and have incredibly fast turnaround times on their medications. So they've been a really great partner too.
A couple of questions about the pre-visit questionnaire that you mentioned. Is that something that you guys require for all pets to fill out before their visit? What about pets that don't have a previous vet history? How much information are you trying to obtain before you show up to their home to kind of get an idea of what you're walking into? And then there was a question just about delivery of the pre-visit questionnaire in terms of PIM system, or are you using an app to deliver that to clients? If you would talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's all digital, it's all automated. It gets pushed from the minute that client books an appointment on the app, then it's a follow-up that it's still in the owner's hands to fill out, and try as we might, not everybody does. But most people really do want to tell you about their pet. And so we try and keep it concise, namely things that you couldn't necessarily get from a medical record, as well as a little bit of both. But, primarily what's the chief concern, chief complaint, questions around fear-free, what their triggers are, what treats they have they been prescribed medications, do they have pre-existing conditions, if they're current patients, have you seen other clinics, or have they been diagnosed anytime between the last visit with BetterVet and not? So, and then for euthanasia, this was actually, this is more recent. We're even doing pre-appointment questionnaires for euthanasias to get a better idea, because as much as I hate to say it, with all of the behavioral cases that we see, we often have some behavioral related euthanasias that we need obviously a much deeper assessment of than, you know, my dog with lymphoma that's been battling lymphoma for X amount of months is, you know, is time. So those are the big pieces of information that we're coming back to. We use EasyVet. It is, we've set it up in a unique way. But that's been our PIMS platform, to be able to have all of the doctors across the country have access to medical records of mutual patients.
Any concerns with safety for you and the staff that are traveling with you to homes? And specifically, the question is not about safety. I mean, we're always worried about safety from the animals that we're interacting with, but obviously you're going to people's homes. So is there ever concern about that in terms of from owners, like, you know, obviously we've all been around emotional, you know, highly charged situations with owners. So any concerns there?
So and that is certainly a concern. I mean, it's with any trade where you're going into homes. I mean, with real estate agents, that sort of thing. So we be smart, and we absolutely we empower our doctors. If you are in a situation, or if you're in a neighborhood, or if something doesn't feel right, be smarter than not, you know, and we do have part of our workflow is through an app that when a team pulls up to the appointment, they check in, and when they leave the appointment, they check out. We can see where teams are throughout the day. And so if there's any discrepancy and they haven't left a home and it's been 2 hours, then something obviously that is a concern. We do always advocate that our teams go in pairs, and I mean, buddy system for sure. And in rare occasions, you know, if it's just that age-old client that, you know, it's a sweet little old lady with the foofy little white dog that you've been taking care of for eons, you know, obviously, if you're comfortable going by yourself to an appointment like that, please do. If you want to go to the nursing home, you know, to essentially just sit and talk with people with, you know, if there's a little foofy dog that really doesn't have anything wrong, they just wanted somebody to talk to, then yes, go by yourself. But between the buddy system and our check-in, check-out system, and really empowering our doctors to know and feel comfortable walking away if they feel iffy about something.
I love that. And I love that with your app. It's like Life 360 for BetterVet. Like you can just, you know, where everybody's at. And that's such a great thing. You talked a little bit about urgent care, some of those emergent cases that maybe you guys are able to get to in a situation where you go to a house call appointment and that pet is in dire need. You know, it's a real emergency once you arrive. What is the protocol then? Are you guys transporting them to the emergency clinic? Is the owner transporting them? How does that all, what are the next steps there?
Yeah, so in events like that, and they do happen, you know, the few hemoabs I've had as a house call practitioner, you know, the owner just, they don't know what's important. They're just like, hey, he's off and he's old and he didn't want to really get up today and he didn't really want to eat today. And you show up and you put an ultrasound probe on and they have a belly full of fluid. At that point, it becomes, and this maybe a little uncouth, but we have the conversation, look, what are the goals for this appointment? You know, are you guys swinging for the fences and you're going to do absolutely everything in your power to save this pet because this is a really bad deal and it's a poor prognosis? And there's some people that say absolutely, and we'll facilitate referral to the closest emergency clinic, educate the client on that, and then assist them to transport if able. And that's in the vast majority of cases, it's owners that just don't know that it's that severe. And then in other cases, it's the owners that do know it's that severe and they just haven't come to terms with it. And so more often than not, when we have that conversation, the owner will say, well, I don't want them to suffer. and we don't want to put them through emergency care. And at that point, talking through quality of life, or even, potentially euthanizing that day.
If you were to, and I don't know how this works, but are there liability concerns if you were to transport a pet to the emergency clinic for an owner? Is that something that is discouraged? Is that something that is done? How does that usually work?
It's very, very uncommon. I can think of one instance where he was a seeing eye dog. That was also one of the hemoabs. And the client was blind, obviously unable to transport. It was like an 85-pound lab, didn't have friends or family. We had an afternoon open, and, at that point, we crafted up a liability waiver to say if something happens, it's not on us. And we transported him to an EC, and he underwent surgery that evening, and he went on to do somewhat well. But once we had that experience, we now have it in our back pocket. Okay, if this is the absolute last, option, then we do have a liability waiver if the team is comfortable transporting.
That makes sense. For in-home euthanasias, are you working with a cremation service that then meets you at the home to take the pet? Are you guys transporting the pet away from the home? How does that usually work?
More often than not, our cremation service, it's coordinated for them to be there, because some of our vehicles just aren't large enough. And a lot of times, like, for some reason, it seems more settling to the owner versus us taking them away. Like, it's kind of like the funeral home coming and picking up their pet. Like, they know exactly where they're going. And just from a logistics standpoint, for us to be able to see other house calls if that routes in a certain way.
That's good. One last question. I know, if we're right at time, so if people have to jump off, but I did want to ask this one last question was, are you ever concerned about animals that may be nervous with strangers, particularly cats, having their home become associated with something negative happening to them, like having the vet come in and do something?
That is a really good point. And I can't think of, I'm racking my brain, of a scenario where we came in and performed services, and then the next day, the cat was urinating or showing signs of stress with the environment, or avoided a certain area of the house. And again, I think that comes back down to us navigating the appointment and handling the pet with fear-free practices, and avoiding those scenarios that would be so traumatic to a pet that could potentially lead to a situation like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Dr. Knight. I know I definitely learned a lot. I hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you, everybody.